All right, thank you so much. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Diane Trujillo. I am the Director of Programs for Serve Washington, and I want to welcome you to today's TTA session for continuation formula grants. So far I'm tracking about 3 programs here. So just confirming that you are here because you're in the continuation cycle in your 3-year, grant. If you're ever confused or want an update as to where you are in your 3-year grant cycle, feel free to confirm that with your program officer. Next slide. And if you haven't already, please sign in the chat. All right, just a really quick overview of housekeeping. This call can be short, but we will be available to answer any questions that may come up, as we know there's a lot of moving parts, especially with these executive orders that are coming out right now. But we will go through all of those to the best of our ability as we know them as of this morning, because things are quickly changing, and we will go through the timeline as well and leave room for questions at the end as needed. Next slide. So here's just a quick visual of the RFGA process. I want to take a moment to pause on that very first box, because as we understand it today, your applications are most likely not accessible in eGrants. So that means if you go into eGrants and you go to create a continuation application, you will not be given that option as of this morning. And that is because of the executive orders and the amendments that we are potentially being asked to take a look at. So again, no action is needed on your part at this very moment. We are tracking it very closely, but that is because of orders requiring us to potentially change language in our current grant year. So although it's not in reference to your formula application, it is important to note that you will have to do some of your grant making and narratives and budgeting outside of eGrants until those applications are updated. And we will definitely notify everyone once those are open. So moving back to this chart, once you were to submit your grant and eGrants, we would review internally for compliance. The grant review committee will be meeting in April. They will provide recommendation to our Board of Commissioners, who would then vote. And then those awards would be made later in the spring/summer, and then you would get your funding and your members for next program year, which is program year 25-26, to continue on with your grant. Next slide. Here's just an overview of the timeline. Now, the timeline right now looks really different than any other year that you've most likely received AmeriCorps funding. So you will notice, actually, right now, apologize, I have the time. We just had a new and recompete session. So you're actually in the correct session. You're in the 10-15 session. But those last 2 TBD dates, that is because we have not received our formal formula instructions from AmeriCorps, the agency. In those instructions, they would also provide a deadline to commissions such as Serve Washington as to when we need to have everything submitted to them. Now, I can share that last year it was May 17th, so we don't anticipate that date would be any earlier than May 17th. If anything, it will be later. So if any of these dates change on here, they will be changed to a later date. We will never go back and make anything due sooner. We are just very closely tracking any instructions that come out of AmeriCorps or any changing information or dates that as we receive them. So because we don't have that information yet, we did not want it to impede upon us releasing this RFGA and at least getting the process started for you all. And then we will update accordingly as we receive that information. Next slide. All right, some key highlights. I believe the RFGA may state, I know for new and recompete, it states 10. If you see 10 on the continuation, it is 11. Most likely you won't need to use all 11. I will update the RFGA as well for that if needed. There has been a decrease, excuse me, in your maximum cost per MSY, so pay close attention to that when building out your budget. And there's also been an increase to your minimum living allowance. So those are two really important numbers to pay attention to because no matter where you are in your grant cycle, excuse me, I'm losing my voice. You will need to make those changes in your budget if you are a cost reimbursement program. From what we understand, criminal history checks, the cost for those are not changing. So you will want to make sure that you are still budgeting for that for all of your potential members and be sure to give yourself some wiggle room with that because we know sometimes we perform criminal history checks on members that don't actually start with the program. So be sure to budget accordingly during your recruitment period. And then you would also want to budget for any staff that's charging time to the grant. And then you will see there is an update to the 20% limit for training for your members. Now, this would be if you are a program that's providing obtaining GEDs for members, credentialing, job readiness and training programs. And we know that that language is really murky. So I would suggest that if you're curious, if your program would qualify for the increase in training percentages to more than 20%, to start that conversation with your program officer. That is a new rule. Next slide. Here's some key highlights about budget, and so I'm going to pass it to Thomas to speak on that.
Yeah, so as usual, we're planning to have a subgrantee meeting. So please budget for that travel. We also expect to continue having the Ask National Service training. So budget for that. I believe now they're nationwide and not just regional, but we also expect to continue having leader corps. So if you think that you'll have members who, be a good fit for leader corps, make sure to budget for that. New thing that we're implementing this year is some guidelines around personnel. So for every 10 MSY in your budget, we want to see 0.5 to 1.5 of staff FTE, at least one staff at half an FTE usage on the grant. No staff less than 20% usage. It starts to get a little dicey and probably should be in the indirect rate if you start seeing those low usages. Any staff at 50% usage or more should be located within the state of Washington. If you think that these conditions can't be met, include a justification with your application. Maybe talk it over with your program officer. And next slide. So member support costs, budget as usual for living allowance and FICA. You do budget for workers' compensation, but not for unemployment, the PFML, or the WA CARES Act. And yeah, so like Diane said, the application might not be accessible just yet. So do what you can outside of eGrants in anticipation of those applications opening up. And we are waiting for more updates from the agency.
Yes, and I do want to pause on this slide really quick. So I want to point out we are still seeing, at least I'm still seeing consistently, that some of our programs, even long-standing programs, are still having some state deductions taken out of their members' living stipends that they should not be having taken out. So make sure that you're working with your payroll, whoever processes your monthly stipends for your members to ensure that they are not having extra deductions taken out that should not be. So they should only be having FICA and that workers' comp as mentioned here. If it's anything more than that, you'll want to ensure that that amount in their stipend gets redistributed to the members and is not taken out moving forward. So that's something to pay really close attention to because we're seeing it happen all the time. And then I also wanted to notate on the previous slide that I know that we're having the subgrantee meeting in Kennewick this year. I really pushed for that because we heard you, we read on the survey responses that the subgrantee meetings should be held in other places around the state rather than Olympia. So I took the opportunity to plan for it to be in Kennewick this summer, July of 2025. But the guidance that we have since received from our state agency is to switch back to having those in Olympia. We will still be having this year's in July in Kennewick, but that's why we kept that budget piece to budget for Olympia. And another thing I wanted to speak on is we know a lot of you were able to take advantage of our travel scholarships for members to attend the Leader Corps in Olympia last week. And we were happy to be able to provide that opportunity, but I don't know if that's something that we could do moving forward. So be sure to build that in your budget if you would like to continue having members travel to Olympia, if that's something that we can offer in the future. Next slide.
And just real quick, since we're talking about
Sure.
withholdings, um, so the living allowance is federally taxable, so the federal tax would also be withheld.
Yes, yes. Federal taxes, no other state deductions. Thank you. All right, so once you can actually get into your eGrants application, it's really important that you do not start a new application. You click on continuation and renewal. Be very careful to go section by section. Sometimes I know myself, it's really easy to assume that there's no updates, but I really want to make sure everyone pays close attention to this because no matter what, you're going to have updates. Now, we are still working with our legal counsel, et cetera, to determine how we are responding to the updates that are being required of us in our current program year in terms of grant language. But what I'm going to put in the chat is some what we're calling and what the agency is calling buzzwords in terms of wording that you will want to avoid in applications. So I wanted to provide you with those words again as we know them this morning to steer clear of in your application. So if you have those in your narratives, you're going to want to update that regardless, and then you would want to notate that in your continuation narrative. So you would want to notate removed language in accordance with current executive orders as outlined by the Trump-Vance administration. That's just an example of how you would want to word it. Yes, as Trish mentioned, this is an example. We are receiving guidance continuously, sometimes on the hour, which is why I know you all have been receiving those email updates from me of we don't have an update yet, but we'll have one by Tuesday. So I will be sending out another update today after receiving some guidance from our legal counsel. But we want to try to set this up as simplistically as possible for you once you are able to submit your continuation application for FY25-26. What we're currently being asked to do outside of these applications is update our language with your grants you're currently operating in. So we're trying to mirror this as much as possible, again, without having much instruction or guidance from the federal agency yet. So I know that that's confusing and vague. And I promise we're distributing information in real time as we receive them. Um, you'll probably want to avoid that third from the bottom bullet point because you will most likely have to make changes in your narratives. This would be brand new for a continuation application, whereas in the past we would tell you you do not need to make changes to your narratives. If you don't have that language in your narratives, maybe you don't need to make changes. If you have some of that language, as I put in the chat, you would want to remove that from your narrative. If you have questions, I definitely encourage you to reach out to us via our Serve Washington email, which we will have in the next one of the next slides. And then, Thomas, are you ready to speak on these budget tips?
Yes. So as usual, you want to, when you build out your budget narrative, you want to have the number columns, but you want to fully explain how you got to those numbers within the narrative part. So, you'll have staff travel, 1186. That'll be the amount, but then over in the narrative section, narrative column, you'll see, okay, airfare, ground transport, lodging, per diem, and you'll break it down. You'll when you adjust things as you do in section 1 or 2, which would be your operating costs and your member costs, keep in mind that section 3, which is your indirect rate, will need to be adjusted. Do you have a federally approved indirect cost rate? Use it. That includes the de minimis if you're using it. If you don't, you can use the 5%, 10% corporate fixed rate as usual. And do not forget the source of funds section. Your total source of funds should match your grantee share. Next slide. And did anybody have any questions on budget? All right.
Thanks, Thomas. All right, so reminder to really read those application instructions carefully. For now, that would be the RFGA that we released, as well as the federal NOFO that came out in fall of 2024. As soon as we receive those instructions, we'll be sure to post those and send them out to you all. For reference, those are typically sent out from the agency in, I believe, January timeframe, and we have still yet to receive them. Be as accurate as you can on the face sheet. Make sure that your authorized reps are up to date and it's no longer listed as someone who is no longer affiliated with the grant. You can do that within eGrants even before completing your application. And also, please keep in mind that your project and contract date is different than your member date. So your project will be a full 12 months, perhaps from September 1st of 2025 through August 31st of 2026. However, your members may be serving, a different time period within those 12 months. So they might be serving September 1st through June 30th. Everyone's program looks a little bit different, but be sure to notate the difference between the two. And if you're wanting to change your project date, or you're wanting your members to maybe, normally they've served September through June, and you're wanting to change from a 10-month program year to an 11-month program year, or make any changes along those lines, be sure to have that conversation with your program officer. Always print your application prior to submitting. And of course, we always recommend giving yourself an early deadline. I know that's difficult right now, and I want to acknowledge that. I did push the deadline out as much as I could based on last year's. I believe last year's were due the first or second week in March, and I pushed it out to the end of March. And I just want to acknowledge that if we do receive updated guidance from the federal agency that indicates that our due date will be far later this year, then we can update our due dates with you all as well. Next slide. Um, you're obviously forced to create your application pieces outside of eGrants right now. So, but that's something that we would recommend anyways, and stay away from the different types of formatting. We highly recommend using all caps for your section headings. It's just a lot easier for compliance review and for anyone who's reading through to determine accuracy. Always check the double spacing, check your page limits. Again, it's the 11 pages, including your first page that has the title of your application. And then once you are able to get into eGrants, you want to make sure that you save often and go in and validate your budget often. So do that as much as possible as you're working through eGrants. Next slide. I put this email in the chat, but it's really important during when our RFGA is open, such as now, that all of your questions go to our general inbox so we can manage from there as we have to create a fair and equitable application process. So we have to be sure whatever guidance we're creating and advising you all of that we advise every applicant of that. So that being said, we know things are shifting really quickly right now. As I mentioned, we're staying on top of it as quickly as we can, but we know that this leaves a lot of room for questions and uncertainty. So we are happy to stay on as long as needed in this call to answer any of those questions that we can right now, especially with the small audience that we have. I'm sure we can manage that. So I will give you all a chance to ask questions, put your questions in the chat. Other than that, we will wrap this up.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Thanks, Diane. This is Asta, United Way, Benton Franklin.
Hi.
Are so this is just my brain wondering. Are we anticipating changes to the contract language that we have with you guys, or any changes to the MSAs that you're going to be expected to make next year with all these new executive orders? Like how
I
down, how far down are some of the stuff going to go?
so I believe it'll be a layered approach right now.
Mhm.
The layer that's being focused on is narratives in FY24 applications. They haven't even gotten into FY25 applications. For example, we submitted competitive applications back in January that we haven't even received any guidance on yet. So right now the current focus is on the service year that your members are currently serving in. That being said, there is a good chance that with your MSA, you would obviously want to make sure that that would be updated to reflect the application that you would be submitting for your formula for FY25. In terms of your current MSA, we have not received guidance that those need to be updated, but I wouldn't assume that it wouldn't. So it seems that the information we're being given is coming out in layers. Now, we were told as recent as yesterday in a meeting that no service activities were asked to be changed. However, there's still a lot of ambiguity when it comes to that, which is why we're having to have so many conversations with our legal on how we want to respond and move forward. I don't know that that really answered your question. It's just that we haven't received guidance that your contracts with the members need to be updated at this time. We have heard that our contract language may change with you all between Serve Washington and you all, but that again is another approach that we're needing a little bit more legal guidance on and not an action item for you at this moment.
Okay. And you'll keep us updated as that goes on because I guess
Yes,
like,
absolutely.
yeah, because thank you.
Yep. We are quite literally
Yeah,
working around the clock.
I believe
Trish and I
it.
didn't
Yeah.
have a weekend. So yeah, we're being careful with our wording because these are uncharted territory. So we're literally having to kind of look at this from a legal lens as well as what information we might be capturing from other commissions and just trying to move forward and be very careful on speculation because speculation is where we can get ourselves in a lot of hot water. So if I were to advise all of programs to go, do a deep dive and change everything and then have to change it 24 hours later, that would just be so counterproductive to all of you, which is why we've really kind of leaned into our legal counsel to help guide these conversations so we can give you all the best resources and language that we can.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that, Diane. Thank
Yeah,
you
of
so much.
course.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will be sending out, I can't remember if I said this, bear with me, my brain. I will be sending out another update today, based on the update I sent to you all on Friday.
I have one question, and forgive
Sure.
me if this is a dumb question, but
There's no dumb questions.
I haven't done this very often, so or worked through a continuous grant at all yet. So looking forward to it. Fingers crossed.
Mhm.
However, Thomas, I know that we had before when we did our grant from last year, we had a kind of a template to work through for the budget. Is that already in our workbook or is that something that you could send to me?
I believe we still have that posted on our website, right?
Okay.
Yes, it should be.
Okay,
Yeah,
great. So just on the website.
yeah,
Perfect.
yeah. And for continuation, you do have to redo your budget.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
It was just an easy, like kind
yep,
of template to work through. So
yep, yep. You should be able to find that on our website. So
beautiful. Thank you.
yeah, if you have trouble, let me know. Reach out.
Okay, I
Yes,
will.
I believe it's under the tab for current grant opportunities or funding opportunities. There should be a budget worksheet listed under there on one of the links. Any other questions that we can help out with right now? Again, I just want to remind everyone there is a very high likelihood, basically 100%, that the RFGA will be updated with, at least our due dates in terms of what the federal agency is expecting of us, along with those instructions that we have yet to receive. And then separately, just please keep a really close eye on your email for updates that are coming from me regarding our response to the current executive orders. And then anything else that our Serve Washington team wants to add that I may have missed? I should add that in your current, there is a possibility in your current program design that you've maybe worked with Lou on for evaluations. You may at some point need to update that language, but we will provide further guidance as that comes down. Anybody else have anything to add before we end this?
I don't. Thanks, Diane.
Uh-huh. All right, well, not seeing any further questions, we will go ahead and wrap up today, but I really thank you for your time. I want to remind you, we are here to support you. So we want to make sure that all of our programs are able to continue and be successful in their application process as well as implementation of your program. So we are here for you and we will continue to navigate through these rough waters. Thank you.
Thank you guys for everything.